case of Cécile Bloch. 3.5 decades after the chilling and mysterious murder of 11-year-old French girl Cécile Bloch, the veil of secrecy was finally lifted by the revelation of DNA evidence. Unveiled alongside this newfound truth after the 35-year hunt was a horrifying connection. The same malevolent hand that took Cécile's innocence also stained France with the blood of other victims during the dark period from 1986 to 1994. To make it worse, the chilling revelation was that the very person responsible for these heinous acts was someone who was supposed to be a guardian of the law, a gendarme and a policeman at the time of the murders. This is the tragic tale of Cécile Bloch. It's the fateful morning of May 5, 1986. The universe seemed to conspire against 24-year-old Luc Bloch, with the day kicking off on the wrong foot. At first, his alarm clock didn't go off, and to make matters worse, nobody in the Bloch household had the foresight to rouse him from his restless slumber. Luc, now in a mad dash to get to work, also had to make sure his young sister wasn't late to school. With a sense of urgency gnawing at his heels, he calls out to his little sister, telling her to hasten her preparations for school as he hurriedly leaves the apartment. In those days, it was common for children to go to school on their own. Every morning on weekdays, the parents Jean-Pierre and Suzanne Bloch would embark on their own journeys to work by 8 a.m. Luc too would depart the family apartment, leaving just before Cécile, who typically set off for her classes around 8:45 a.m. Lunchtime brought a cherished routine. Cécile would return home alone, savoring a comforting bowl of soup before serenading the household with her beloved violin. This gifted young girl was a maestro of melodies and really loved music. She harbored an affection for dogs and also excelled at school. At noon, her loving mother, Suzanne, would routinely dial the family apartment to make sure her daughter got home safely and had taken her lunch. But on that fateful day, an eerie silence met her call. The girl didn't pick up the phone, and this would lead to a horrific revelation that would create many questions about what had truly transpired on this fateful day. Let me take you back to the moment Luc Bloch embarked on his daily journey to work. As he stepped out of the apartment, the darkness of the landing greeted him yet again. There was no light for the third consecutive day. Frustration coursed through him as his fingers fumbled in the inky darkness to find the elevator button. The only functioning elevator glided to a halt on the third floor, and inside stood a well-dressed young man. This man, possibly in his late 20s, possessed an athletic build with a pockmarked face. Luc, feeling a twinge of embarrassment, extended a cordial greeting, then disembarked on the first floor. The stranger wished him a strangely emphatic, "Good day." Something about this encounter struck Luc as peculiar. The man's politeness appeared excessive for a stranger. It was almost unnerving. In hindsight, Luc would recall the haunting final words uttered by this strange man. "Have a very, very good day." Little did he realize that in a matter of minutes, this very man would perpetrate the unspeakable to his young sister that would forever leave a scar in his heart. The clock struck 8:20 a.m. and within the building, the concierge perused a fresh newspaper while neighbors bustled about their morning routines. None among the building's residents could fathom that in just half an hour, young Cécile would meet her tragic fate. A fate that awaited her lifeless form in the shadowy depths of the building's basement, a staggering 3 floors beneath the building that was once her peaceful home. Suzanne, her heart sinking with each unanswered call, began to entertain a glimmer of hope that Cécile might be at her friend's house. She dialed the number, praying for a reassuring voice on the other end, but her fear intensified. As her friend confirmed the chilling truth, Cécile hadn't been to school, and she hadn't seen her that day either. By 1 p.m., panic had engulfed the parents, driving them to sprint back into the apartment, their frantic voices echoing as they desperately called out for their beloved daughter. Cécile was nowhere to be found. Suzanne's gaze fell upon her daughter's absent school bag, a sign that she had indeed departed. But to where? Meanwhile, Jean-Pierre initiated a series of agonizing calls to local hospitals. Their anxious pleas met with the same heartbreaking reply. No girl matching Cécile's description had been admitted. In the building's lobby, the parents beseeched the concierge to aid in the search for their missing child. With urgency fueling their every step, they raced to the police station, scouring the nearby streets and playgrounds as they went. Cecile was known for her unwavering attendance at school, and there were no significant issues at home to explain her absence. The question loomed large. Why had she left and where had she gone? The concierge, now joined by two concerned neighbors, embarked on a painstaking search of the building floor by floor, inching their way downwards, but the haunting truth remained. Cecile had vanished without a trace. All that remained was to descend into the foreboding cellar. The first room they entered was empty and devoid of any answers, while the second room stood locked. They then entered the third room, a chamber of forgotten clutter that obscured any immediate revelation. The room was a chaotic maze of forgotten possessions, a lot of junk from years past, so densely entangled that nothing could be seen at a single glance. In a breathless moment, a flashlight pierced the darkness, casting a feeble glow upon the basement's desolation. At first glance, it appeared vacant, but just as they were about to retreat, at the corner of his eye, one man caught a glimpse of something amiss in the periphery, a grimy, time-worn carpet that seemed to conceal something beneath it. He summoned the others, a glimmer of dread tugging at their hearts. Unfortunately, they found who they were looking for, but not the way they hoped they would find her. Outside the house, police cars and an ambulance had already arrived at the scene when Cecile's parents returned. They rushed past the gathered crowd into the basement. It was too late. The innocent life of young Cecile had already been taken. Her innocence brutally shattered. The wheels of justice began to turn. A relentless investigation was launched into the heart-wrenching homicide. The grim investigation unveiled a chilling timeline. The malevolent intruder had infiltrated the blocks, lingering within its walls, and shared a sinister 40-minute encounter with Cecile, with witnesses testifying that he had departed the building at 9:20 a.m. They all echoed a hauntingly consistent description of the suspect. A dark-haired young man, aged between 25 and 30, his face marred by the cruel reminders of severe acne scars, the very same man who had exchanged strange pleasantries with Luke that morning. Drawing from the accounts of 6 witnesses and Luke's recollection, the police conjured a rough sketch of the malefactor, which found its way onto the pages of newspapers across France. While investigators managed to secure the assailant's biological material and ascertain his blood type, the nascent era of DNA forensics limited their progress. The evidence, a tantalizing puzzle piece, remained locked in a cold, waiting silence as the promise of breakthroughs in forensic science beckoned from the shadows. Yet the revelations remained scant, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a community haunted by uncertainty. Just a month prior, the city had shuddered at the news of a similar predator haunting their midst. A man bearing an uncanny resemblance to the malefactor now under investigation had assaulted an 8-year-old girl in an elevator. Yet miraculously she had survived to share her harrowing tale with investigators. This brave child, known only as Sarah, recounted how the man had cunningly posed as a police officer during the ordeal. What sent shock waves through the community were the eerie parallels emerging in 3 additional sexual assault cases. In these grim chapters, the assailant, employing the same sinister ruse, had targeted a 26-year-old woman and 2 young girls aged 11 and 14. Each victim had fallen prey to his apparent police identification card and the menacing glint of handcuffs, tools of restraint that he employed with chilling precision. The authorities were gripped by a sense of urgency as they grappled with the unsettling question. Was this a deceitful ploy to gain the trust of unsuspecting victims, or was he actually a police officer? Their suspicions were stoked not only by the violence inflicted upon his victims, but also by the chillingly calculated tactics he employed. A nagging intuition lingered among investigators, a conviction that this malefactor was no ordinary criminal. Their gut told them he was either a sworn officer or a gendarme, a belief that would later be chillingly confirmed. However, capturing this predator was far from straightforward, as he continued to elude the clutches of justice with diabolical cunning. Despite widespread distribution of the sketch to the local population, it proved futile in unmasking the perpetrator. By the close of 1987, a sinister shadow had been cast over a number of crimes, all attributed to this man, based on his distinctive appearance and chilling demeanor. the investigation remained in an agonizing deadlock for years, swinging back and forth between closed and reopened status. In a cruel twist of fate, the latest DNA tests conducted in a bid for justice yielded inconclusive results, shrouding the identity of the perpetrator in a veil of impenetrable darkness. Tragically, the parents of the young victim never lived to witness the moment of reckoning. Suzanne met her untimely end in a devastating traffic accident in 1989, while Jean-Pierre departed the world in 2011. Their hearts bore the heavy burden of never knowing the face of the monster who had stolen their beloved Cecile away forever, leaving a haunting legacy of unresolved pain and injustice. The embers of the unresolved mystery began to rekindle, lighting the way for the determined cold case detectives. They uncovered a piece of evidence that sparked a glimmer of hope. The killer, known to drive a white car, had once been a member of the prestigious gendarmerie. His chilling history culminated in a final crime committed near a gendarmerie training center. The techniques he used displayed the unmistakable signs of police and military training. In 2021, the police made a bold move. They called in around 750 former police officers who had worked in the Paris area during the time of the crimes. Among them was the very man who had evaded justice for so long, who was called in for questioning on September 29, 2021. The investigators' goal was clear: to collect the DNA of these suspects, hoping fervently that the murderer might finally be identified among them. The plot took a harrowing twist on September 24th, when a summons landed in the hands of a man, compelling his appearance for questioning on September 29th. The demand extended further, requiring the surrender of a DNA sample. However, in a startling turn of events, the narrative pivoted on September 27th when the man's wife reported him missing. As the clock ticked relentlessly towards the fateful date, the puzzle was far from complete. 2 days later, on September 29th, 2021, in a quiet town in the south of France, tragedy struck in the form of a suicide. François Verove, a 59-year-old man, chose to end his own life, leaving behind a farewell note that laid bare a haunting confession. Among its chilling lines, it read, "I admit being a great criminal who committed unforgivable acts until the end of the 1990s. In a heart-wrenching conclusion, DNA tests revealed the somber truth. The man authorities had hunted relentlessly for years, the pockmarked man, the elusive predator, was unmasked as François Verove. However, much about his background remained shrouded in mystery. Born on January 22, 1962 in France, he had grown up under the stern gaze of a strict father, a stepmother, and 2 stepsisters. His biological mother had succumbed to the ruthless grip of the flu. In his youth, he had harbored an unsettling fascination with horror movies, perhaps offering a glimpse into the darkness that would later consume him. In 1983, François embarked on a new chapter as he moved to Paris and joined the National Gendarmerie. By June 1985, he had married and took it upon himself to construct a family home from the ground up, a testament to his ambitions. In the eyes of a former friend, he wore the dual masks of kindness and decency, but his temper lurked just beneath the surface, a volatile element that could erupt without warning. Behind this facade, however, lay a chilling truth. He was completely the opposite of the positive traits he may have portrayed to others. For innocent young girls had suffered beneath his sinister hand, miraculously escaping his clutches, all except for young Cecile Bloch. François' malevolence didn't stop there. In 1987, he cold-bloodedly murdered 2 adults, 38-year-old Gilles Politi and his devoted housekeeper, Irmgard Müller. Armed with crucial DNA evidence, investigators embarked on a gripping journey, determined to unravel the secrets of a malefactor whose dark deeds seemed endless. They fervently believed his sinister trail of crimes extended far beyond those already uncovered, driving them to delve deeper into unsolved cases, searching for hidden connections that could reveal the full extent of his reign of terror. Unfortunately, earthly justice may never hold him accountable for his atrocities, and retribution seems out of reach. The specter of his deeds looms large, leaving the question of inevitable justice to the realm beyond. As this harrowing tale unfolds, we are left with unanswered questions, wounds that may never fully heal, and the haunting presence of a man who committed unspeakable acts. François Verove may have evaded earthly justice, but his actions are forever etched in the indelible ink of infamy. Amidst the darkness, a glimmer of hope stands as a testament to the relentless tenacity of those who pursued answers. With advancements in DNA technology, the truth emerged from the depths of despair. In the afterlife, in the realm beyond, justice may yet find its elusive mark, allowing the innocent souls scarred by his malevolence to finally rest in peace. In the shadow of these chilling revelations, let us remember all those who suffered at the hands of this predator. Their memory lives on as a reminder that even in the darkest corners of our world, the relentless pursuit of justice can be a beacon of hope. As we close this chapter of human frailty and malevolence, let us remember Cecile, not for the darkness that took her, but for the vibrant spirit she once embodied. For every life taken too soon, there remains a legacy that defies the shadows, a testament to the unwavering hope that someday justice will prevail. May the souls of Cecile and all the other victims rest in eternal peace. Kim Langwell was born on December 24, 1965, in Houston, Texas. She grew up there with her parents and sister, surrounded by friends, and was known for her determination from a young age. At the age of 18, Kim gave birth to her daughter, Tiffany. But shortly after, Tiffany's father left them, so Kim had to raise her daughter on her own. She moved to a town called Beaumont, hoping to start fresh and build a stable life for herself and Tiffany. First, it wasn't easy. Kim often had to juggle 3 jobs at once just to make ends meet. But eventually, she landed a good position at a local oil refinery, which gave her more time to focus on her daughter. At this job, Kim also met a man named Kim. The two started dating, and before long, they got engaged, excited to plan their future together. On July 9, 1999, 34-year-old Kim had planned to spend the evening at a restaurant with Kim and her 15-year-old daughter Tiffany. That day, she was scheduled to finish her shift at work around 5 p.m., head home, and then go to the restaurant. At around 5:15, Kim called Tiffany to tell her about those plans. She also mentioned that she had some things to do before heading home and might be a little late. By 6:30, Kim arrived at her house, but Kim, for some reason, still wasn't there. He and Tiffany tried calling her, but she didn't answer, which was quite unusual for her. As the hours passed with no sign of Kim, they became increasingly worried. Finally, at around 10 p.m., he decided to search for her. He drove along the route Kim would have taken from work to home, checked local stores, and stopped by other places she might have been, but there was no trace of her anywhere. Kim kept searching until he spotted Kim's car parked outside a pharmacy. Kim herself was nowhere to be found. He looked around the area, hoping to find her, but there was no sign of her anywhere near the pharmacy. At first, Kim thought maybe she changed her mind about dinner and gone somewhere else. It crossed his mind that she could have left with a friend and decided to leave her car there, even though it didn't make much sense to him. Still, he convinced himself that she was probably fine and headed home. The next morning, Ken drove back to the pharmacy and saw that Kim's car was still sitting in the parking lot. She also hadn't come home overnight and hadn't contacted anyone. At that point, his worry turned into fear. Realizing something was seriously wrong, Ken decided to call the police. After hearing all of this, the officers immediately got to work. Their first step was to examine Kim's car. There were no signs of a struggle or blood inside, but they did find something unsettling. Her cell phone was left behind. Next, they spoke with Kim's daughter, Tiffany, who had been the last person to speak with her. Tiffany explained that after work, her mom had planned to stop by the house of a man named Terry, with whom she'd been in a relationship for 7 years. Even though they had broken up over 6 months earlier, Terry still kept in touch with Kim from time to time. That evening, he asked her to help him with a repair project. He needed someone to hold a few shelves while he mounted them to the wall. Tiffany said she called Terry on the night her mom disappeared, but he told her Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes and left. When the police spoke with Kim's friends, they learned that her relationship with Terry had been anything but smooth. At first, when Kim started dating him, her friends thought he seemed like a decent guy, but that impression didn't last long. Over time, Terry's behavior became more aggressive and controlling. He constantly called Kim, demanding to know where she was and who she was with. He insisted that she obey him and frequently caused arguments over the smallest things. Eventually, Kim decided to end this relationship. But breaking up with Terry wasn't easy. He tried to stop her in every way possible. Sometimes he promised to change, and other times he threatened to hurt her if she left him. Despite his efforts, Kim finally managed to walk away. After that, he didn't do anything crazy to get her back, but he continued to stay in contact with her. Kim was afraid to completely cut him off, worrying that if she did, he might harm her or her daughter. From conversations with Kim's friends, police uncovered even darker details about her relationship with Terry. Shortly before their breakup, he had become physically violent, even going as far as choking her during an argument. After that incident, Kim became genuinely afraid that one day Terry might take things even further. At one point, she confided in her friends, saying that if she ever disappeared, they should start looking for her in Terry's backyard. All this information, combined with the fact that Kim had visited Terry shortly before she vanished, made investigators take a hard look at him as a possible suspect. But when they questioned Terry, he denied any involvement in her disappearance. He told police that Kim had only stopped by for a few minutes to help him mount the shelves and left. Terry also claimed that about 4 hours after Kim's visit, he went to a local bar and spent the rest of the evening there. This meant Terry had no alibi for the time Kim went missing, and his motive seemed clear. Investigators got a warrant to search his home and combed through his property, but they found nothing. No trace of Kim, no belongings, no blood, nothing to link Terry to her disappearance. Forensic experts also examined Kim's car but didn't find any clues either. In the end, police couldn't uncover any evidence linking Terry to her disappearance or anything that could explain what happened to Kim. But soon, a new suspect entered the picture. Kim's friends revealed that she had repeatedly complained about her boss, Frank. Not long after she started working for him, Frank began showing her unwanted attention. He openly flirted with her despite being married. As time went on, Frank began writing her love letters, trying to convince her to start a relationship with him. In total, he sent more than 100 letters. The whole situation made Kim uneasy. She was afraid Frank might fire her one day just because she didn't feel the same way. In fact, Kim had been so uneasy about the situation that she gave all of Frank's letters to her close friends, asking them to hold on to them in case anything ever happened to her. The police reviewed Frank's letters, and their content made it clear he was completely obsessed with Kim. On top of that, Kim had confided in her friends that Frank would slowly drive past her house several times a day. Sometimes he'd even park across the street and just watch her. What made the situation even more bizarre was that Kim's current boyfriend, also worked at the same company, but that didn't seem to bother Frank at all. Given all this, investigators began seriously considering Frank as a suspect. Kim had vanished shortly after leaving work, and Frank had more than one motive for doing something like that. First, his obsession with her could have escalated to the point where he decided to abduct her. Second, he may have feared that Kim might expose him either to their employer or to his wife. Either scenario could have caused him serious trouble, giving him a strong reason to silence her. The police decided to question Frank, but he claimed he didn't have any strong feelings for Kim, describing it as nothing more than a fleeting crush that had long passed. He also denied writing her any letters, despite the fact that investigators had all of them in their possession. Frank's behavior struck the detectives as odd, and they weren't quick to take him at his word. He also claimed to have an alibi, but that raised even more questions. Frank provided a receipt from a store showing he'd been there at 6:56 p.m. However, in theory, he still had enough time to abduct Kim before that. Later that evening, Frank hosted a poker game with some friends who confirmed he was with them during that time. But there was still a window of over an hour between the time Kim left work and when Frank's alibi kicked in, a period for which he had no explanation. Despite their efforts, the police couldn't find any evidence linking Frank to Kim's disappearance, so they shifted their focus to other potential leads. Investigators tried to locate surveillance footage from cameras along Kim's route, from her home to Terry's house and then to the parking lot where her car was found. But this effort yielded no results. They also reviewed her phone records and discovered that her last call had been to her daughter, with no further activity afterward. The detectives then concentrated on search efforts, scouring the city and its outskirts. Volunteers joined in, and police made a public appeal, asking anyone with information to come forward. Yet, despite these efforts, they made no progress. At the same time, more reports about Terry's odd behavior started to surface. Just days after Kim's disappearance, her sister decided to confront him at his home, as both she and the rest of Kim's family strongly suspected him. However, Terry appeared not only indifferent to Kim's fate, but went as far as openly mocking her relatives, showing no sign of concern for the missing woman. Another interesting observation came from Terry's employees. He owned a small business and his office was located on his property, so his workers frequently came by. One of them reported that on the day Kim disappeared, he arrived at Terry's house around 5:50 p.m. and Kim's car was parked outside. However, he didn't see Kim herself. Considering that Kim had left work around 5:15 p.m., this raised some serious questions. Terry had claimed that she only stopped by for a few minutes, but his employee's account clearly contradicted that. Soon after, the police received another lead. Multiple witnesses reported seeing a tow truck owned by Terry near the parking lot where Kim's car was eventually found. According to them, the tow truck was there at around 6:45 p.m., which didn't align with Terry's alibi of being home all evening. Despite these suspicious details, there still wasn't any solid evidence linking Terry to Kim's disappearance. Investigators kept searching for more clues, but ultimately the case would drag on for years. Kim's family never stopped believing that Terry was responsible for her disappearance, and by then no one held out hope that she would be found alive. Her sister also told police that Terry continued acting strangely. At one point, he called them and said he was planning to take a polygraph test to clear his name, but then he casually added that he would probably fail it. On top of that, Terry occasionally called the family to ask if they had heard from Kim, as if she had simply gone away for a while instead of vanishing without a trace. And if that wasn't unsettling enough, someone had been calling Kim's relatives for years, only to stay silent on the other end of the line. The family was convinced Terry was behind it, but once again, the police couldn't find anything to tie him to Kim's disappearance. 3 years later, another strange incident involving Terry raised suspicions again. He approached Tiffany on the street and started asking if she had heard anything from her mother. Kim's sister stepped in and told him to leave. In response, Terry said something like, "Aren't you curious about which polygraph question I failed? It was the one where they asked if I killed Kim." Kim's family immediately contacted the police again, but their response was the same. Without solid evidence, they couldn't confirm Terry's involvement. From that point on, the case completely stalled. 8 years later, investigators reopened it and reviewed everything from scratch, but it led nowhere. Terry, by then, had stopped cooperating with the authorities and flat out refused to answer any more questions. This went on for many years, until early 2024, when the Oxygen True Crime documentary team took an interest in Kim's case. They decided to create an episode about her disappearance and launched their own investigation. They interviewed Kim's friends and family before turning their attention to the two main suspects, Frank and Terry. Frank agreed to answer all their questions, but even 25 years after Kim's disappearance, his behavior was still quite unusual. He continued to deny ever pursuing Kim romantically or writing her love letters. Once again, he insisted he had nothing to do with her disappearance. With little progress, the team shifted their focus to Terry. Unlike Frank, Terry refused to speak with them, but they didn't give up and decided to confront him in person. When they arrived at his house, Terry saw them through a window and immediately ran out the back door, apparently trying to escape in his car. Unfortunately for him, the crew blocked his path, leaving Terry no choice but to answer their questions. He claimed he hadn't seen them and wasn't trying to run, even though his actions suggested the opposite. Terry then insisted he had no reason to harm Kim, saying he wasn't bothered at all by her leaving him. This directly contradicted what Kim's friends and family had told investigators. She had often mentioned threats and erratic behavior from Terry. Things took an even stranger turn when Terry began contradicting his own original statements. Initially, he told police that Kim had stopped by to help him put up shelves. Now, he claimed she'd only come to pick up the rest of her belongings from his house. The contradiction caught the attention of investigators, prompting them to reopen the case. After the documentary aired, prosecutors decided to take a bold step. They prepared to charge Terry with murder. Even though they still lacked solid evidence tying him directly to Kim's disappearance, almost no one doubted his involvement by this point. Investigators hoped that during the trial, new evidence would surface, or that the jury would find Terry's suspicious behavior enough to convict him. However, just as prosecutors were finalizing their case, something unexpected happened. A witness came forward after watching the documentary, and their testimony changed everything. According to this individual, Terry had once told him that he had killed his ex-girlfriend and buried her body on his property. With this new information, police secured a warrant to search Terry's property and arrived with a team of forensic experts. For days, dozens of people combed through the area using high-level ground-penetrating radars. Finally, they made a breakthrough. The radar revealed a section of the concrete floor beneath Terry's bedroom that was about the size of a human body. Oddly, pieces of rebar had been cut out of this spot, even though the rest of the foundation was fully reinforced. Investigators began digging and soon uncovered a blanket buried in the ground. Inside, they found human remains. They were sent to forensic experts who quickly confirmed what everyone had already suspected. The remains belonged to Kim. Right after this discovery, Terry was arrested and charged with murder. With Kim's body now found beneath his bedroom, the prosecution finally had the evidence they needed to secure a conviction. As of now, 67-year-old Terry remains in jail, awaiting his trial, which is scheduled for the spring of 2025. In addition to the criminal charges, Kim's daughter has filed a civil lawsuit against him, seeking compensation and aiming to strip Terry of the financial means to fund his defense in the criminal case. It's worth noting that following Terry's arrest, the original investigative team faced heavy criticism. As we know, Kim had told her friends that if she ever went missing, they should look for her on Terry's property, and 25 years later, her body was found exactly where she said it would be. To this day, it's unclear why Terry's house and property weren't thoroughly searched back then. Perhaps investigators did check the yard but found no signs of recent digging. It's also unknown when exactly Terry buried her under his bedroom. It's possible he initially hid her body elsewhere and only moved it under the house after police had completed their initial search. Regardless, Terry now has almost no chance of escaping justice, and Kim's family has finally been able to give her a proper burial. Benjamin Blue Birchrank was born in August 1987 in Missouri. He grew up in the countryside alongside his family. Ben had an older brother, Sam, with whom he shared a very close bond. In 1989, the Rank family moved to a picturesque farmhouse. The boys spent a lot of their time outdoors, and it was then that Ben began to take an interest in snakes. A tragic incident in September 1992 triggered a series of unfortunate events. The family was away when a gas leak occurred, leading to an explosion in their beautiful home. The Ranks were forced to move into a trailer. After some time, Ben's mother Kim was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. Despite these hardships, the family overcame them. They were very close-knit and always supported each other in any situation. Recovering from previous tragedies, in 2002, they moved to a new home where a special room was designed for Ben to keep his snakes. In 2009, after a long battle with cancer, Kim passed away. Before her death, she made her sons promise to look after the farm and pass it on to their children. As time went by, Ben's love for snakes knew no bounds, and the young man founded Renwick Reptiles, which soon gained recognition. This allowed him to sell snakes worldwide, from the United Kingdom to Japan. Breeding snakes became the meaning of his life. He was described as a great breeder, who was devoted to his work, caring more about the snakes than the money. The reptile farm bred a multitude of reptilian subspecies, growing and reproducing both the most common species and some of the rarest subspecies on Earth. Ben's reptiles were of immense value. Just a portion of his python collection was valued at over $1 million. Ben was a solitary man who had long aspired to start a. In 2010, at a party, he met a woman named Lindley. Their relationship moved forward quickly. Within weeks, Ben introduced his girlfriend to his brother Sam and Sam's fiancé, Eli. Eli and Lindley had sons from previous relationships, so they found common ground quickly and became friends. Lindley soon became part of the Rank family. The couple began living together. Lindley helped Ben at the snake breeding farm. They were in love and lived as a full family. In March 2012, Lindley gave birth to their daughter Amelia. Ben was thrilled to become a father. However, the happy family life faced challenges again. Frank Rank, Ben's father, encountered significant business troubles. Previously, he had engaged in fraudulent stock transactions to cover medical bills and Kim's treatment expenses. Just a day before the FBI planned to visit the farm, Frank took his own life. Frank's passing halted the investigation. The sons were deeply affected by another parental loss, but managed to pull through by supporting each other. Ben inherited the house and farm, while Sam received an amount of money far exceeding the house's value. Each brother had their own family and children, but this didn't stop them from living as one big family in their parents' home. They lived together harmoniously, with Sam spending his inheritance on repairing the farm without hesitation. Initially, things were fine, but soon financial disputes caused friction between the brothers after their father's death. Ben focused on his business and family and decided to formalize his relationship with Lindley on April 14, 2014. They married officially, adding Lindley as a full-fledged member of the Rank household. Ben and Lindley also opened a second business, a spa named Essentia Spa Incorporated, but it faced financial difficulties under Lindley's management. Financial issues often led to arguments between them, despite Lindley's hard work being insufficient to cover all salon expenses consistently. At the same time, Sam and his wife faced significant financial challenges. Ben allowed them to sell some of the furniture of the house. Lindley disapproved, leading to a rift between the families. The relationship was irreparably damaged. Ben decided to improve the family's financial situation by arranging to sell some rare reptiles for a significant sum. However, the deal fell through due to a tragedy that occurred on the farm. On June 8, 2017, Lindley walked into one of the farm's barns. There, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay Ben. Lindley called her brother Sam for help and dialed the emergency number. She reported that she had found her husband unconscious on the ground. During the conversation, Lindley dropped the phone and ran outside. Sam continued the conversation and confirmed that his brother was dead. Sam suggested that a snake might be to blame for what had happened. Montgomery County Sheriff's deputies were called to the snake breeding facility for the first time in a long while. Law enforcement officers were afraid to enter the farm, facing over 3,000 snakes and having to conduct an examination of a man lying in blood, wary of a possible attack from a deadly viper believed to be the assailant. However, when coroner Dave Colbert arrived and took a closer look, he discovered a shell casings on a shelf at eye level. This was something far more sinister than a venomous snake bite. Shell casings were found near the body, but no weapon was discovered. The assailant had shot Ben multiple times in the back and head. None of the relatives heard shots or saw the attacker. Sam and Lindley were taken to the sheriff's office for questioning. Lindley suggested that Sam might be involved in her husband's death, even citing a motive. Apparently Ben wanted to sell the house, but Sam was opposed. Sam was asked to undergo a lie detector test, which he passed. The police had no reason to detain Lindley and Sam, so they were released. The investigation into who might have wanted Ben Rank dead began with various theories proposed, the first being robbery. But it remained unconfirmed as none of the rare snakes were missing and all valuable items remained untouched. Just days after Ben's demise, police interrogated Lindley again and tested her hands and clothing for gunpowder residue. However, results came back negative. Following her husband's funeral, Lindley ceased communication with Sam and Eli altogether. She sold her husband's business, inherited the house, and sought to claim a life insurance payout for Ben worth $1 million. After receiving the insurance money, Lindley planned to sell the Rennick family home for $740,000. Sam's family was notified about the eviction. Discovering the rapid insurance claim and business sale following her husband's passing, Sam Rennick suspected his brother's wife in the tragic event. Sharing his suspicions with investigators, Lindley was called in for another interrogation. She admitted to having complex relations with Ben and occasionally meeting with a man named Eric. Eric had an alibi, so he was excluded from the list of suspects. Lindley's admissions were startling. It turned out about 3 years after their marriage was officially registered, she was unfaithful to Ben with at least 2 different men. Messages between the couple showed that Ben suspected his wife of infidelity, which had indeed strained their relationship lately. On October 5, 2017, the Missouri State Highway Patrol conducted a polygraph test on Lindley and informed her that she had failed it. However, without solid evidence linking her to the crime, she was released. Nevertheless, the investigation into Ben Rennick's case slowed but did not cease. Later investigators learned that a month before Ben Rennick's passing, Lindley had made her first attempt on his life. She concocted a story of Ben being a cruel tyrant who oppressed her daily and even physically assaulted her. She shared the story with a spa salon coworker to garner support and assistance. They plotted to end Ben's life by giving him a poisonous protein shake laced with 15 Percocet pills. Unaware, Ben drank it. He fell severely ill during that period but survived, oblivious to having been poisoned. Lindley Rennick was interrogated by investigators 6 times in total, and further assistance in the investigation came unexpectedly. On January 14, 2020, information from a state prison emerged. A witness claimed to know about Ben Rennick's death. The witness was Brandon Blackwell. He told Missouri State Highway Patrol investigators that Lindley had shot Ben and conspired with her ex-boyfriend. Brandon mentioned that he had dated Lindley while she was married to Ben. 1.5 years after Ben's death, they had a child together, but by 2019, they had separated. Brandon claimed that Lindley confessed to the act and conspired with her Sparkland coworker, Ashley Shaw, and another ex-boyfriend, Michael Humphrey. Years after Ben's demise, Lindley Rennick and her former boyfriend, Michael Humphrey, were arrested for his death. However, following their arrest, Lindley and Humphrey pointed fingers at each other. So who really pulled the trigger? According to Michael's testimony on the day of the event, he went to the farm with Lindley, who asked him to pose as a buyer. He put on gloves and was supposed to shoot Ben, but couldn't do it. Eventually, Lindley took the gun and shot her husband herself. The investigation into Ben Rennick's death continued for 3 long years. On January 16, 2020, arrest warrants were issued for Lindley Rennick, Michael Humphrey, and Ashley Shaw. Ashley was offered immunity in exchange for her cooperation and testified against her boss. The former Sparkland employee shared that Lindley had complained about her husband and convinced her to assist in a plan. She claimed that Ben was constantly belittling, demeaning, and even physically harming her. Fearing divorce would lead to Ben gaining custody of her children, Lindley decided to eliminate him. Planning together to poison him with a lethal cocktail during questioning, Lindley and Michael accused each other of Ben's demise. In October 2021, Michael Humphrey faced trial in Ine County. His lawyers hoped that revealing the murder weapon would lead to a second-degree murder charge. Despite possessing the gun, no conclusive DNA evidence was found on it. To lessen his sentence, Michael Humphrey made a deal with the prosecution by disclosing the location of the murder weapon. His cooperation led to a life sentence on a less severe charge of second-degree murder without defense at the trial. On January 3, 2021, Michael Humphrey was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole. The against Lindley Rennick began on December 6, 2021. She was charged with the shooting and demise of Ben Rennick. On June 8, 2017, at his snake breeding facility in New Florence. Court documents stated that the plot to end Ben Rennick's life originated in Lindley's spa salon. The probable cause statement mentioned that Ben was aware of Lindley's financial troubles and that Lindley feared Ben could take her children away. This led her to fabricate a story of domestic abuse. The first attempt to end Ben Rennick involved a protein shake laced with narcotics. Search warrants for Ben and Lindley Rennick's Facebook accounts confirmed the protein shake story and Ben's awareness of Lindley's financial issues. The court hearing detailed the events of the day when Ben Rennick was killed, fully reconstructing the sequence of events through cross-examination. On the day of the incident, Michael Humphrey picked up Lindley from the spa salon, while Shaw sent text messages from Lindley's phone inside the spa to conceal their true location and mislead the investigation. According to court documents, Humphrey intended to end Ben's life but asked Lindley to do it. After firing shots, Humphrey collected most of the casings but missed some in his haste. He also disposed of Lindley's clothing after returning to the spa, where Lindley took a shower, which helped avoid detection of gunpowder residue on her hands and clothes. Defense attorney Catherine Barrere asked Lindley Rennick to share her personal and family history, education, relationship with ex-boyfriend Michael Humphrey, work history, and the lead-up to her marriage with Ben Rennick. This was aimed at portraying her as a victim of domestic violence. However, no evidence of such violence was found, undermining this defense narrative. Michael Humphrey was part of a group that allegedly planned to end Ben Rennick's life. Lindley Rennick described her relationship with Humphrey as codependent, involving his drug dealing and her addiction. She ended her relationship with Humphrey at the end of 2010, according to previous witness statements, but reconnected with him about a month before Ben Rennick's death. Lindley Rennick firmly denied the prosecution's allegations regarding the alleged plans to end Ben Rennick's life. This included the supposed failed attempt to poison Ben with a protein shake containing narcotics. The couple faced financial and marital difficulties. The spa center wasn't doing well, and contractual deals for selling snakes had yet to provide financial benefits. In court, Lindley admitted to having extramarital relationships with several men, expressing deep regret for her actions. By the time she considered discussing divorce, she was unsure who to turn to. Given her father's history with divorce and his strong views on both divorce and affairs, seeking someone to support her in her conversation with Ben, she reached out to past boyfriends and reconnected with Michael Humphrey. During cross-examination by the prosecution, Lindley confessed to willingly participating in her husband's death and intentionally concealing Michael Humphrey's involvement. She cited marital difficulties, including disputes, alleged physical and sexual abuse by Ben, and the stress associated with his snake breeding business. Lindley feared Ben and worried about his reaction whenever she brought up the topic of divorce. On June 8, 2017, she brought Michael Humphrey to the farm that day. She claimed her presence at the farm was not meant to end her husband's life, but rather to discuss a divorce. Lindley mentioned taking out some trash from Ben before entering the nursery where she saw Humphrey and Ben washing their hands. Lindley described being unable to hear their conversation as she was preoccupied with how she would tell Ben she wanted a divorce. Her voice trembled while recounting seeing Humphrey draw a pistol and shoot her husband. Hence, she heard more shots. Reality hit hard when Lindley returned to the snake breeding facility and found Ben's body. She called Ben's brother Sam, who arrived soon after. They checked for a pulse and whether Ben was breathing, hoping he might still be alive. Lindley expressed regret for not immediately informing police that she had been at the breeding facility earlier with Michael Humphrey. The life insurance policy that Ben had taken out years earlier could have resulted in a payout of $1 million. However, Lindley waived her rights to this money. During the court hearing, Lindley expressed regrets about her ongoing deceit. "I was just trying to escape from the truth of what happened," she stated, clarifying that she never wished for her husband's death. Following the final verdict, Lindley Rennick's defense team chose not to petition for a new trial, and no appeals were filed against her conviction. Lindley Rennick filed a defamation lawsuit against Blackwell, asserting that his statements about her involvement in her husband's death were false. However, prosecutor Kevin Zellner questioned Lindley's testimony during cross-examination. He queried why she didn't check on her husband after hearing gunshots and why she didn't call 911. Furthermore, he asked why she sent friendly messages to him and Humphrey after the shooting and continued to lie even when emergency responders got involved. During sentencing for second-degree murder and armed criminal action, Lindley Rennick broke down but did not admit guilt. On December 9th, she was found guilty of second-degree murder. The 33-year-old was sentenced to 13 years for murder and an additional 3 years for armed criminal action in January by Judge Kevin Crane. a total sentence of 16 years. Sam Rennick's final words conveyed deep disappointment. He was astonished that an individual's life in Missouri could be valued at just 13 years. Ben Rennick, a young man brimming with hope and a promising future, found himself in a dire situation due to the actions of one woman. Drew Shadine was born on September 26, 1981 in the small town of Pequois Lakes, Minnesota. From an early age, Drew was full of energy and determination. She loved drawing, crafting, and keeping active with basketball, volleyball, and golf. She was also involved in various charity programs, always looking for ways to help anyone in need. Her warm personality and genuine kindness made her a lot of friends, and in high school, she was even voted prom queen. After graduating, Drew enrolled at the University of North Dakota, where she majored in fine arts. Even though the campus was a 3-hour drive from her hometown, she tried to visit her parents as often as she could. Drew managed to juggle her studies, where she excelled, 2 part-time jobs, and an active role in campus life. She also continued to dedicate her time to charity, never losing sight of what mattered most to her. On top of that, Drew signed up for a special university program that gave her the chance to travel on a regular basis, and she was especially excited about her upcoming trip to Australia. While in college, Drew started dating a guy named Chris. The two quickly became serious and began making big plans for their future together. On November 22, 2003, 22-year-old Drew headed out for her usual weekend shift at a clothing store where she worked part-time. Later that evening, she was scheduled to work as a waitress at a local club. After finishing her first shift, Drew stopped by a shop in the same mall, bought herself a purse, and walked toward the parking lot. On the way, she called her boyfriend Chris, and they chatted for about 4 minutes. But then, something strange happened. Drew suddenly went silent in the middle of the conversation. After a pause, she said, "Oh my God." Okay. Then the line went dead. At first, Chris didn't think much of it. He assumed the call had dropped as Drew walked through the parking lot or that her phone battery had died. 3 hours later, Chris received another call from Drew's phone. But when he answered, all he could hear was silence. There was a faint noise in the background, something that sounded like wind, along with what seemed to be the sound of phone buttons being pressed. He called out Drew's name several times, but there was no response. Chris tried calling her back, but Drew didn't answer. This time, he started to worry. He decided to call her roommate to see if she had heard from Drew. The roommate said she hadn't spoken to her all day, but reassured him, saying Drew was probably just busy with work and there was no need to panic. Shortly after the conversation, though, Drew's roommate got a call from the manager at the club where Drew was supposed to work that evening. To her surprise, the manager said Drew hadn't shown up for her shift and she hadn't even called to let anyone know. This was completely out of character for Drew, as she was always responsible and reliable. Her roommate, recalling the strange call Chris had mentioned, began to worry that something bad might have happened. She started calling local hospitals, thinking Drew might have been admitted somewhere, but no one matching her description had been brought in. By then, it was late in the evening, and the roommate decided it was time to contact the police. She explained that Drew had missed her shift, didn't come home, and had some unsettling phone calls with her boyfriend, but the police didn't see any immediate cause for alarm. To them, there wasn't enough evidence to suggest something serious had happened. After all, was 22, so they just recommended waiting a little longer before taking any action. Still, Drew's roommate decided to take matters into her own hands and reached out to the University of North Dakota's campus police. Unlike the city police, they jumped right into action. Their first stop was the mall where Drew had worked that day. It was the last place anyone had seen or heard from her. When they checked the parking lot, they found her car still in its usual spot, even though her shift had ended hours ago. Another weird thing was the fact that the car doors were unlocked. Inside, there were no signs of a struggle or anything to indicate that something bad had happened. But then the officers noticed something really suspicious. Lying on the ground near the car was a small knife sheath. This discovery raised serious concerns, prompting the university police to contact the city police, who finally stepped in. Officers requested CCTV footage from the parking lot, hoping for a lead. But there was a problem. Drew's car was parked in a blind spot, completely out of the camera's view. Determined to figure out what happened, investigators turned to the mall's security footage. They started combing through hours of video from every camera inside the building, trying to trace Drew's movements before she vanished. It was quite a challenge given the size of the mall, so the process was anything but quick. Meanwhile, news of Drew's disappearance quickly spread across campus. The university wasted no time organizing a massive search effort. Hundreds of students stepped up to help, scouring streets, wooded trails, riverbanks, and other secluded areas. The faculty also urged anyone with information to come forward, hoping for a clue that could shed light on what had happened to Drew. Meanwhile, the police got hold of Drew's phone records, which backed up her boyfriend's story about their last call. But when they dug into the phone's location data, they found something odd. The cell tower pings showed that Drew's final call to Chris hadn't come from the mall parking lot. Instead, it had been made from a nearby town, about a 30-minute drive away. Based on the timeline, investigators realized that the noises Chris heard during the call, like the sound of wind and buttons being pressed, could have occurred while Drew was already in this other location. Since her car was still parked at the mall, it was clear Drew couldn't have gotten to another town on her own. This led police to suspect that she may have been abducted. But despite their extensive efforts, the next few days passed without any new leads. Officers kept combing through the mall's surveillance footage while search teams scoured the city, desperately hoping to find even the smallest clue. 2 days later, the case finally took a turn. In a small town called Crookston, near the spot where Drew's phone last pinged, police found a black shoe by the riverbank. When they showed it to Drew's roommate, she immediately recognized it. It was one of Drew's. This discovery deepened investigators' fears. If Drew had been abducted, the evidence suggested she'd been taken far from her town. Police quickly contacted other departments in the area, sharing details of the case and asking for their help in the search. Meanwhile, investigators finally found CCTV footage from the mall that showed Drew on the day she disappeared. They saw her visiting several stores after her shift, seemingly shopping for Christmas gifts for her loved ones. This footage gave investigators a clear idea of what Drew was wearing at the time she vanished. It also confirmed that she had been wearing the same black shoes as the one found near the river in the neighboring town. With all the available clips featuring Drew in hand, investigators started analyzing the footage for any suspicious individuals who might have been following her or appeared in multiple frames with her. Before long, one person caught their attention. A middle-aged man dressed in all black, walking with a cane. His unusual behavior stood out immediately. According to the CCTV footage, the man entered the grocery store connected to the mall multiple times. However, he never bought anything. Instead, he appeared to ignore the shelves entirely and focus on other shoppers, particularly women. Investigators soon spotted the same man on other footage taken outside the store. He was sitting on a bench watching passersby. But then something truly suspicious happened. When a young woman who vaguely resembled Drew walked past him, he got up from the bench and started following her. Over the next few hours, the police uncovered more clips showing the same man following other young women around the mall. Unfortunately, the footage alone didn't give them enough to identify him, so detectives turned to their database, searching through records of men in the area with prior convictions for serious crimes. After compiling a list of 60 names, the investigators narrowed it down to just 4, eliminating anyone who didn't match the suspect's description. From the remaining candidates, they identified one man who bore a striking resemblance to the figure in the mall footage, 50-year-old Alfonso Rodriguez. Rodriguez had an extensive criminal history and a troubled past. He had struggled with severe health issues since childhood, which made school and social interactions, especially with women, extremely challenging. For instance, one of his legs was shorter than the other, forcing him to rely on a cane to walk. Alfonso eventually turned to drugs, and at 21, he had his first run-in with the law. He attempted to assault a woman who had offered him a ride home. Once inside her car, he pulled out a knife and tried to attack her, but the victim managed to fight him off. Not long after, he attacked 2 more women in the same month. He was sentenced to 5 years of mandatory therapy and then released back into the community. That same year, Alfonso was arrested again, this time in suspicion of assault. However, the prosecution couldn't gather enough evidence for a conviction. Shortly after, he attempted to abduct another woman, stabbing her during the attack. This time, he was caught and convicted. Rodriguez was sentenced to 23 years in prison but was released on May 1, 2003, just 7 months before Drew went missing. What's even more troubling is that he was placed under the supervision of his relatives, who themselves doubted whether he was ready to return to society. Following his release, Alfonso moved in with his mother in Crookston, the very town where Drew's shoe had been discovered. Given all of this, detectives were almost certain Alfonso was connected to Drew's disappearance. On the 4th day of the investigation, they brought him in for questioning. Alfonso admitted he had been at the mall, but insisted he had nothing to do with the abduction. He claimed he was there to watch a movie at the theater inside the mall. He even named a specific film, but when investigators checked his story, they discovered that the movie wasn't playing, not just at that theater, but nowhere in the entire town. Realizing Alfonso had lied, the police asked to search his car. Surprisingly, he agreed without requiring a warrant. Inside, they found a receipt from a store showing he had purchased a pocket knife. When detectives looked into the knife's model, they determined that the sheath found near Drew's car was an exact match. But that wasn't the most alarming discovery. The knife itself was also in Alfonso's car, submerged in a bottle filled with cleaning solution. When forensic experts examined Alfonso's car, they discovered traces of wiped blood. They managed to extract a DNA sample, which was then compared to DNA taken from Drew's toothbrush. It was a perfect match. On top of that, they found a woman's shoe in his car and another knife. This one hadn't been soaked in cleaning solution. When they tested it, they discovered traces of blood on the blade. DNA analysis confirmed it was Drew's. By December 10th, with all the evidence in hand, Alfonso was arrested and charged with kidnapping and suspected murder. However, despite how damning the case against him seemed, detectives still had no idea what had actually happened to Drew or where she was. Alfonso refused to confess, so police focused all their efforts on finding Drew. They appealed to the public for help, brought in even more volunteers, and concentrated their search on Crookston and the surrounding areas. But despite their best efforts, months went by with no results. Heavy snowfall that winter made the situation even worse, as search teams were unable to access remote areas. By early March, 3 months after Drew disappeared, preparations began for Alfonso's trial, and he pleaded not guilty before the judge. At this point, almost no one believed Drew was still alive, but with all the evidence they had, prosecutors were confident they could secure a conviction. Meanwhile, police pressed on with their search. As spring arrived and the snow started to melt, they were finally able to explore previously inaccessible areas, like forests, open fields, and bodies of water. This continued until April 17th. When investigators received the sad but expected news, Drew's body had been found a few miles west of Crookston, submerged in the local river. During the winter, the area had been frozen over and covered in snow, making it nearly impossible for search teams to locate her earlier. But as soon as the snow fully melted, her body was quickly discovered. Medical examiners found bruises, knife wounds, and evidence of SA on her body. As for the cause of death, they couldn't reach a definitive conclusion. Along with the stab wounds, there were signs of strangulation, but there was also a possibility that she died from exposure to the cold after being left in that location. It was determined that Drew had likely died about 3 hours after she was abducted. Now that the police had found Drew's body, the prosecution had one final task: to ensure the killer faced justice. Since the abduction occurred in North Dakota, but the murder took place in neighboring Minnesota, the case fell under federal jurisdiction. This meant Alfonso could face the death penalty, even though capital punishment was banned in both states. Despite this, the governor of Minnesota publicly supported the possibility of a death sentence, though many residents of his state opposed it. In North Dakota, this case was the first in over a century where a resident faced the prospect of the death penalty. The trial began in the summer of 2006, and Alfonso continued maintaining his innocence. But with the overwhelming evidence against him, there was almost no chance of avoiding punishment, and on February 8, 2007, he was sentenced to death. As is often the case with capital punishment, the execution was delayed for years. During this time, Alfonso remained in prison, awaiting his fate. Meanwhile, Drew's family got actively involved in pushing for a law to create a national registry of offenders convicted of violent crimes. In the summer of 2007, this law, named in Drew's memory, was signed by the president. It set up a website where the public could access addresses and other personal information of people convicted of violent offenses. Drew's parents repeatedly said that Alfonso should never have been released from prison in the first place. Later, even the doctor in charge of the mandatory rehab spoke out, telling reporters he had strongly opposed his release. He'd recommended transferring Alfonso from the clinic to prison, because he believed Alfonso still posed a danger to society. Despite these warnings, Alfonso was allowed back into the community, a decision that ended in tragedy. Unfortunately for Drew's family, the sentencing of Alfonso Rodriguez didn't mark the end of the case. In 2011, Rodriguez's lawyers filed an appeal claiming that their clients suffered from developmental issues. While this initial attempt failed, a second appeal filed 10 years later in 2021 was far more successful. This time, the judge ruled in favor of the defense. He acknowledged evidence suggesting Rodriguez did have developmental challenges and noted that his attorneys hadn't been given a fair chance to present these details during the original trial. The judge also highlighted Rodriguez's troubled childhood and significant health problems. The defense team further argued that the medical examiner who testified during the trial had exaggerated the extent of Drew's injuries, suggesting that the truth wasn't as horrific as it had been made to seem. All of this ultimately led to reopening the case, leaving Drew's family to once again fight for justice. In the end, the judge overturned Rodriguez's death sentence and ordered a new trial. As a result, in March 2023, Alfonso was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. What's particularly unsettling is that Rodriguez had already confessed to the crime during a 2013 interview from death row. However, now he will spend the rest of his life behind bars, no longer facing the threat of execution. In Drew's memory, her university established a scholarship that remains active to this day. Her family also created a memorial garden in her hometown, and plans are underway to build a similar memorial on her university campus. Of Esmeralda Riches. Today we will find ourselves in the state that occupies almost 3/4 of the island of Haiti. It is the Dominican Republic. Our story begins on the Aza Coast, one of the most popular beaches of the Dominican Republic. A black Honda Accord stopped in a parking lot by the beach. Music was playing softly in the car as 2 men and 3 girls were talking passionately about general topics. They liked longtime friends who had met for a fun outing. All the passengers got out of the car and walked leisurely towards the sea. A grown man called out to one of the girls and took her hand. He whispered something in her ear and she shouted to her friends that she would come back later. The beach was practically deserted in the evening, making it a place of rendezvous and solitude. They hurriedly got into the car and talked for a long time. The man stroked her long hair and touched her plump lips, which like a powerful magnet attracted his kisses. A few hours after the walk, the girl returned home and went to bed. The next morning, her mother noticed that her daughter had not come to breakfast. She went to her daughter's room and knocked on the door, hoping that the knock would wake her up. But she was met with silence. The woman entered the room and screamed. At the scream, the girl's father came running in. A picture appeared before the parents. The whole bed was flooded with blood, and in the bathroom, on the floor in a pool of blood, lay their daughter. She was dead. From what they saw, the couple's legs gave out, but the father found the strength to call the police. Around 8 a.m., police arrived at the scene, examined the girl's room, and interviewed the parents. The body was taken to the National Institute of Forensic Medical Examination to establish the cause of death. The parents cried and wondered what could have happened to their daughter at home at night. But unfortunately, the events preceding this tragedy began to develop much earlier and escaped the parents today. before us will be a modern story of impossible love between a grown man and a young girl. She was 16-year-old Esmeralda Riches Martinez, born August 23, 2006, in the province of Leota Gracia, in the family of restaurant owners Elio Rosti and Isabel Martinez Richers. She grew up in a complete, happy family and had an older sister with whom she was very friendly. Esmeralda grew up to be a very pretty and bright girl. She loved to sing, dance, and displayed her special artistry, which she was proud to show in videos for social media. In 2023, Esmeralda was in her senior year of high school and was planning to go to university. She was always surrounded by friends because the girl's cheerfulness attracted not only her peers to her. 35-year-old John Kelly Martinez was among Esmeralda's close friends. John Kelly entered the public education system after passing a competitive teacher's exam and was undergoing induction for new teachers. He was still on probation, which lasted for 1 year. The pupils took a great liking to the new teacher as he treated them like friends and had regular outings outside of school. Despite the fact that John was married to another teacher and had 2 daughters, he devoted most of his free time to his students. For a long time, the teacher painstakingly built a trusting relationship with them, disposing them to him. They were mostly bright and beautiful students, such as Esmeralda. The evening walk on February 12, 2023 was a perfectly normal meeting of teacher and female students outside of school. Esmeralda was the last person John Kelly picked up that evening. He followed her into the house, introduced himself as a teacher, and promised to bring her back home. The group of 2 grown men and 3 young female students then headed to the beach in Teacher Kelly's car. After stopping, everyone got out of the car except John Kelly and Esmeralda. John and Esmeralda were alone for a while, but afterward joined the company. They drank a few beers and took a short walk along the shoreline. Suddenly, Esmeralda felt sick. The girl started bleeding during the walk, forcing them to cut it short and bring her back home. In the morning, her parents found her dead. An autopsy revealed that it was a homicide, but the parents did not get answers to their questions. The National Institute of Forensic Medicine tentatively determined that Esmeralda Rich's death was due to a perineal laceration with severe internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock following violent acts. As a result of the autopsy, the girl's death was classified as a violent death of undetermined cause. However, the question remained, who dared to do such a thing when Esmeralda was in familiar company on a walk supervised by a teacher? Interviews with the girlfriends and a review of the seized phones provided clarity and identified the first suspect. The testimony of one of the girls who had been out with the teacher and Esmeralda that evening was stunning. She said she saw the professor slip 5 pills into Esmeralda's drink while they were on the beach. The initial findings of the police sparked a lot of talk in the Dominican Republic, where abortion is banned. There was a lot of speculation in the community about the cause of Esmeralda's death. Some said she died of a heart attack, while others were sure she died from blood loss caused by the abortion pills John Kelly had allegedly given her. Everyone hoped that the medical examiner's report would put an end to the rumors and speculation. However, all the speculation dissipated when the results of the forensic examination were ready. Upon learning the results, ruled out the possibility of pregnancy, Esmeralda's relatives were clearly puzzled and very skeptical. The victim's relatives stated that the family was unhappy that the report ruled out Esmeralda's pregnancy because this theory best matched what investigators had found out based on the forensic examiner's tests and findings, as well as the evidence collected during the investigation. After all, a review of the Esmeralda's friends revealed many text messages that, although indirectly, indicated the teacher's long-term interest in the student. After the unsuccessful version of pregnancy, the investigation concluded that John Kelly drugged the girl without her consent and roughly abused her on the beach, which led to profuse blood loss and, a few hours later, to the death of Esmeralda. The results of repeated toxicology tests were pending. Given the progress of the investigation, the prosecutor's office requested a coercive measure against John Kelly Martinez and his alleged accomplice, Ruben Murillo Martinez, as they are the main suspects in the young woman's death. John Kelly Martinez was suspended as a teacher for 90 days without pay because of the evidence collected against him. The prosecutor's office requested a year of preventive detention against John Kelly as the prime suspect in Esmeralda's death. Preventive detention is the imprisonment of a person not as a punishment for a crime they have committed, but as a means of preventing the possible commission of criminal acts by that person for a period of time. New episodes and interviews with witnesses about the student's death, however, have created even more intrigue surrounding this horrific tragedy. After several interrogations, authorities learned that due to severe bleeding, the entire company had to stop several times along the way to help her. But no one took the bleeding Esmeralda to the hospital or called emergency services. Some of these stocks were captured by surveillance cameras where, according to witnesses, the defendants bought alcoholic beverages and Esmeralda and John went into the restroom together. Later, they also went into the pharmacy to buy medicine, water, and feminine hygiene pads. It was later established that Esmeralda had to completely change her clothes at one of the stops, because her own were completely soaked in blood. After Esmeralda was taken home, her parents also noticed that she was bleeding heavily. Thinking it was a woman's menstrual cycle, the mother simply gave her daughter a painkiller to help her fall asleep. It was later discovered from one of the girls' cell phones that Esmeralda had sent her friend an audio message in the early morning hours, asking for help and saying, "Please help me, I'm bleeding." Unfortunately, the friend listened to the recording too late the next day, and Esmeralda was found lifeless on the floor of her bathroom, covered in blood. On February 14th, John Kelly Martinez was arrested by police, and his home was searched the following day. During the search, the clothes he was wearing on the night out with his female students were seized. His cousin, Ruben Murillo, who was the second man present that night, was also accused of trying to hide John's bloody pants. There were many ambiguities in the investigation into the event, and the prosecutor's office should have clarified the situation, rather than making new speculations about an incident that alarmed the public. The public demanded a thorough investigation to determine the real cause of the young girl's death, as many felt that obvious facts on the surface had not been taken into account by the investigators. The investigation involved not only a search of the house where the teacher and his family lived, but also the car in which the crime against Esmeralda may have taken place, triggering the bleeding. The authorities urgently requested the car, but it was discovered that John Kelly's wife had sold it in a hurry. The investigation believed that the hasty sale of the car was an attempt to hide evidence that could prove violent acts. The purchaser of the automobile was Panaga Pillar. After it was learned that a coercive measure would be sought for alleged complicity in the case against J.C. Espinal-Rijo, John Kelly's wife, and Frank Panaga, the new owner of the car, the vehicle was finally inspected. However, other than traces of Esmeralda's blood found in the car, no other evidence was discovered. The court ruling determined that there was insufficient evidence to keep J.C. Espinal-Rijo in jail, and she was released. The investigation continued for several months, and the prosecutor launched his own inquiry, re-interviewing the three girls who accompanied Esmeralda. Their testimony helped investigators reconstruct the events of that night, minute by minute. At 7:30 p.m., John Kelly Martinez, 35, and his cousin Ruben Murillo Martinez went to the home of Esmeralda Reaches in Lautra, Bandague, with three other girls in the passenger compartment of the car. John excused Esmeralda from her mother, introducing himself as her teacher and telling her of the exciting evening that awaited her daughter and the other students. Esmeralda went along with him. Turned out that originally the whole group was going to go to the fair with amusement rides, but on the way John changed his mind and altered the destination. Most likely, John Kelly did not intend to go to the fair, but preferred a quiet Mau Beach. On the way to the beach, John stopped the car at a store where he bought a beer. Returning to the car, he asked his brother to sit in the back seat while Esmeralda sat in the front. The man had a thermos with him into which he poured the beer and added 5 unknown pills to the drink. He offered it to Esmeralda without informing her of the contents of the thermos, but one of girl fans noticed. Arriving at the beach, the three girls got out of the car, leaving Esmeralda and John Kelly alone. They were alone in the car for about 30 minutes, and their prolonged absence was noticed by Esmeralda's friends. After a moment, without explanation, John appeared and told everyone to get in the car as they were leaving urgently. They had to make several stops along the way because Esmeralda started bleeding heavily. One of the stops was at 9:45 when they stopped at a gas station parking lot. According to eyewitnesses and CCTV footage, Esmeralda used the cafeteria restroom. Esmeralda's classmate said she asked to stop at the gas station because she needed to visit the ladies' room. And when she went in there with her friends, they noticed her clothes were soaked with blood. There was a lot of blood in the restroom, so much so that the girls had to mop the floor. The girlfriends tried to help Esmeralda. They were very frightened and asked the woman working at the gas station if it was normal. And she said it was not normal and advised them to see a doctor immediately. The girls told John Kelly about it, but the man refused to go to the hospital, saying that if he did, he would go to jail. According to the inspection document, traces of Esmeralda Rich's blood were found both in the parking lot and in the service restroom. At the gas station, they also stopped at a pharmacy at 10:21 p.m., where they bought some medication, water, and sanitary pads. Authorities obtained surveillance footage and a receipt for the purchase to verify the fact. At 11 p.m., John Kelly returned Esmeralda to her home. She arrived with heavy bleeding that began minutes after she was left alone in the car with her teacher. On February 16th, an official report came back stating that Esmeralda had been very severely and brutally abused, resulting in severe blood loss and hypervolemic shock. As scary as it sounds, this condition could have been stabilized, and medics know how to effectively help a person. But unfortunately, Esmeralda never made it into the life-saving hands of doctors that night. Toxicology testing confirmed the presence in Esmeralda's body of the active ingredient in the pills used to terminate a pregnancy, but it was previously confirmed that Esmeralda was never pregnant. This component is a synthetic gestagen with contraceptive effect when taken orally in the recommended dosing regimen. This component suppresses ovulation and fertilization, which most likely indicates that the teacher, John Kelly, was preparing for intimacy with the student he liked. After repeated medical examinations, Esmeralda's body was finally allowed to be buried. The young girl was buried in the Albano Public Cemetery. As Esmeralda's family and friends said goodbye to her, they described her as a kind and cheerful girl. Her parents bitterly recalled that fateful evening and blamed themselves for entrusting their daughter to a teacher and letting her go for an evening walk with him. On June 4, 2023, after reconstructing the last hours of Esmeralda Rich's life, prosecutors filed charges against math and physical education teacher John Kelly Martinez. On June 12th, the La Altagracia prosecutor's office filed an indictment and a request to open a trial against Martinez and his cousin Rubiel Milo Martinez with the La Altagracia Instructional Court. The case was scheduled to be heard on August 23, 2023. However, due to the passage of Storm Franklin, the case against the teacher was rescheduled. On November 24, 2023, the judge ordered that John be retried as the sole defendant in the death of Esmeralda Riches. The trial was scheduled to begin on January 9, 2024, but was again rescheduled because only half of the witnesses called were present. The trial is scheduled for February 1st and 6th, 2024, before the Collegiate Court of the Penitentiary Chamber of First Instance of La Altagracia. The defense attorney urged the court to note that his client can only be charged with violence and accuses the parents of not taking action to avoid the death of their daughter, despite knowing about her problem. The prosecution, for its part, presented more than 40 pieces of evidence, including witness testimony and examination reports. During the hearing, the prosecution also heard testimony from pathologists and forensic experts, who showed the audience all the audio and video materials that had been collected during the painstaking and long work to determine the cause of the girl's death. In his closing statement, the defendant tried to make himself look like a victim. John Kelly Martinez admitted that he and Esmeralda were indeed close that night in the car, but he sincerely tried to assure the court and everyone present that everything was consensual. The important fact, he said, was that when he brought Esmeralda home, she was alive and well. The motion to compel specifies that Martinez voluntarily inflicted the victim with lacerations, abrasions, and contusions that resulted in her death, with severe acute external and internal bleeding and hemorrhagic shock as the terminal mechanism of death, according to the autopsy report. John Kelly Martinez's speech made no impression on the court or those in the audience. On March 14, 2024, Professor John Kelly Martinez, 36, was sentenced to 20 years in prison for violence. John Kelly Martinez will serve his prison term at the Anamuya Correctional and Rehabilitation Center in Rubiel Maro Martinez, cousin of the defendant charged with accessory after the fact, received a conditional enforcement measure consisting of periodic court appearances. Following the enforcement measure against the professor and his cousin, Rich's family attorney, Raimundo Rosario, said the family was satisfied with the restraining measure and would not file a motion to reopen the investigation. The verdict for Han eased the pain of Esmeralda's parents a bit. They thanked everyone involved in the investigation and trial. They also indicated that they were satisfied with the verdict. Esmeralda's family did not experience the joy of the teacher's verdict, because the acute pain of losing their daughter was forever lodged in their souls. Esmeralda's mother, Isabel Martinez, said she regretted letting her daughter walk with this blessed teacher and 3 friends. I talked to him on the phone and asked, "Are you a teacher?" And he said, "Yes, I am." And I told him, "Take care of my daughter. I'm going to let her out because she's with you." I was innocent that my daughter was with this man, the mother said. The Ministry of Education provided support to the family and relatives of the deceased girl, as well as to the relatives of the other girls who were with Esmeralda on the day of the tragedy. In their message, they expressed their hope that cases of this nature will not be repeated in the education community and in society at large. With the pain of parents who can never come to terms with their daughter's death, they said it is their turn to fight for justice. A story that began as a fun evening outing with a visit to the beach turned into a night of terror that cost the life of student Esmeralda Riches, who bled to death after lacerations, abrasions, and bruises inflicted by a man whose parents entrusted with the lives of their children. Obviously, everyone involved in the evening's outing has a share of blame. Unfortunately, because of her parents' excessive strictness, Esmeralda was afraid to ask them for help and tell them what had happened. Sometimes we think that it is easier to conceal for fear of punishment or just to remain misunderstood. But what a pity that, in this battle, fear wins, taking precious life. Joan D'Alessandro was born on September 7, 1965 in the quiet town of Hillsdale, New Jersey. She had loving parents and 2 older brothers. Their family lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood and was deeply religious. From an early age, Joan regularly attended her local church and later she enrolled in a Baptist elementary school. Joan quickly made a lot of friends and did great in her classes. She also developed a love for ballet and really started to get into the arts. At about the same time, Joan joined the Girl Scouts, spending a lot of time outdoors with other girls, picking up some valuable life skills, socializing, and just having fun. One of their main activities was selling cookies. The girls would go door to door in their neighborhoods, asking people to buy them. April 19, 1973 was Clean Thursday, and Joan's school had the day off. The 7-year-old spent it at home with her mom, mostly playing in the yard. Around 3 p.m., she saw one of her neighbors pull into the driveway. Some of the neighbors had pre-ordered cookies, and Joan would deliver the boxes once they were ready. By that afternoon, she only had a few deliveries left. So, without wasting any time, Joan ran inside, grabbed a few boxes, and headed out. She told her mom she'd be back in a few minutes. But as time passed and Joan didn't return, her mom started to worry. At first, she assumed Joan might have bumped into some neighborhood kids and lost track of time playing with them. Their neighborhood was quiet and considered very safe, and back then, kids often played outside unsupervised. But when an hour passed and Joan still hadn't returned, her mom started to think something might be wrong. By then, it had started raining, and she thought Joan might have taken shelter at a friend's house to wait out the bad weather. The rain stopped pretty quickly, but Joan was still nowhere to be found. Soon after, her dad came home from work and his wife told him she couldn't find Joan. He immediately got in his car and started driving around the neighborhood looking for her, but there was no sign of Joan anywhere. Meanwhile, Joan's mom tried to find the list of addresses where her daughter was supposed to deliver cookies, but realized Joan had probably taken it with her. However, she remembered something Joan had said just before leaving. She hadn't mentioned which neighbor she was going to, but she had said that the person had just pulled into their driveway in a new car. Her mom immediately thought of a family who lived just a few houses down, as they were the only ones in the neighborhood with a new vehicle. While her husband continued searching the streets, she decided to check with those neighbors and visit some other houses where Joan might have dropped off cookies. Joan's mother visited several neighbors, but all of them said they hadn't seen the girl that day. Frustrated and increasingly alarmed, she returned home, and when her husband told her he hadn't found any sign of her daughter either, they decided it was time to call the police. After hearing Joan's mother's story, officers jumped right into action and launched a large-scale search operation. The local fire department joined in, sending out crews to help, while the police went door to door in a several-mile radius, hoping someone might have seen Joan or could point them in the right direction. But no one had spotted the girl. This was quite odd, especially since the street leading away from Joan's house was a main road that led to a busy shopping center. Cars were constantly coming and going, yet no one had noticed a young girl walking in the area. As word of Joan's disappearance spread through the neighborhood, dozens of local residents began joining the search. Many of them knew Joan's family well and were eager to help in any way they could. The number of people involved in the search grew by the hour. By midnight, local officers requested assistance from the FBI and state police. Search dogs were brought in to track Joan's scent using her belongings, but the efforts led nowhere. Volunteers combed through abandoned lots, empty houses, nearby forests, parks, and even the shores of a local lake. But despite their dedication, there was no trace of Joan. At first, police considered the possibility that Joan might have wandered too far from home and gotten lost. But by the middle of the night, it became clear that the situation was far more serious. If she had simply lost her way, she likely would have been found by then. This led investigators to suspect foul play. Joan's mother dismissed any chance that her daughter had left somewhere voluntarily. Joan never wandered far from home without permission and always returned when she was supposed to. That day, she'd promised to be back in just a few minutes, so her mom was convinced something terrible had happened. Around 3 a.m., the police decided to take a break from the search and resume at sunrise. By morning, even more volunteers had joined in. It felt like the whole town had come together to look for Joan. Women who were home with their own children also found ways to help, preparing over 2,000 meals for the search teams throughout the day. Along with the local community, nearly every officer from the police department was involved, as well as about 250 firefighters from nearby towns and a few FBI teams. That day, searchers combed through every inch of the area. They entered every home, checked every yard, garage shed, basically anywhere Joan could possibly be. But despite their exhaustive efforts, they found no trace of her. The search went on until one of the teams spotted a child's shoe less than a mile from Joan's home. It looked very much like the ones Joan had been wearing when she left the house. But that wasn't all. Near the shoe were several empty boxes of the same cookies Joan had been selling. Police immediately showed the shoes to Joan's mother, but the moment she saw it, she said it didn't belong to her daughter. On top of that, investigators examined the cookie boxes and concluded they had likely been there for several weeks. Eventually, some local residents came forward and identified the shoe. It belonged to their child. So this lead was ruled out, and investigators were back to square one. Despite their determination and the support of hundreds of volunteers, the day's search once again ended without answers. Meanwhile, the FBI began focusing heavily on the possibility of foul play. After speaking with Joan's mother, they learned that she had already visited all the neighbors where Joan might have delivered cookies. Each of them said that Joan had not come to their house, and there was no trace of the girl or the cookies anywhere. However, Joan's mother shared something else with the detectives, a gut feeling she had about one particular neighbor. As we know, before leaving the house, Joan mentioned she was going to deliver cookies to a neighbor who had just pulled into their driveway in a brand new car. The only neighbors who had recently purchased a vehicle were the McGowans, so Joan's mother went straight to their house. She was met by 26-year-old Joseph McGowan, who lived there with his mother and grandmother. He claimed he hadn't seen Joan, but something about him felt off. Joan's mom couldn't put her finger on it. She just had a bad feeling about him. The detectives had already spoke with Joseph, but he denied having anything to do with Joan's disappearance. Still, they couldn't ignore some red flags. He seemed to struggle with his own story, constantly tripping over details about his alibi for the time Joan went missing. But despite their suspicions, there wasn't any physical evidence in his home linking him to the case. Joseph also had no criminal record. it was actually quite the opposite. He worked as a school chemistry teacher and had a great reputation in the community. Still, as the hours turned into days, the detective's gut feeling about him only grew stronger. Eventually, they brought him into the station for a polygraph test, and Joseph agreed to answer their questions. The results weren't what he was hoping for. The operator flagged multiple signs of deception on nearly every key question. However, the police couldn't use the polygraph results as solid evidence of his guilt. Instead, they informed Joseph about his failure and kept pressing him to tell the truth. Eventually, to the surprise of the detectives, their persistence paid off. And in a quite unexpected way, Joseph broke down and asked them to bring a priest to the station. After speaking with the priest in private, Joseph finally confessed to what happened that day. According to his story, he had been mowing the lawn outside his house when Joan approached him with a few boxes of cookies. He said he had ordered them a couple weeks earlier, so he invited Joan inside to pay for them. From this point, Joseph's account took a strange turn. According to his words, he suddenly realized he didn't have the exact amount of cash to pay her, which, for some unknown reason, deeply upset him. Feeling ashamed, he grabbed Joan and dragged her to his bedroom, where he struck her multiple times and subjected her to other horrifying acts. The detectives, of course, didn't buy this part of his story for even a second, but they let him continue his confession. After committing these horrific acts, Joseph suddenly realized the gravity of what he'd done and started panicking about what to do next. He knew that if he let Joan go, it would destroy his life, so he decided to get rid of her. After several failed attempts, Joseph killed Joan, wrapped her body in an old sofa cover and placed it in the trunk of his car. Then he cleaned up the blood in his bedroom, stuffed the cleaning rags into a bag, and drove to a national park in neighboring New York State about 20 miles from his home. At the park, he carried Joan's body into a wooded area and hid it behind a large rock. On his way back, he also disposed of the evidence in random trash bins along the road. Shortly after he returned home, Joan's mother came by looking for her daughter. Later, Joseph even joined the search efforts for the missing girl along hundreds of locals. After finishing his confession, Joseph says something quite unsettling. He told the police that despite everything he'd done, he was completely calm that night and had no trouble falling asleep at all. While parts of Joseph's story immediately raised questions, investigators prioritized finding Joan's body. They contacted New York's Park Services and Joseph gave them detailed directions to the location. Thanks to this, the search took less than an hour. Joan's body was discovered behind a large rock in a remote wooded area. Once medical examiners began their work, more inconsistencies in Joseph's story came to light. During his interrogation, Joseph insisted he didn't SA Jones, but forensic experts found undeniable evidence to the contrary. As for the rest, they did find numerous injuries and bruises, and his description of the cause of death aligned with reality. Another glaring contradiction in Joseph's account was the fact that Joan's body was completely unclothed. Yet even when detectives confronted him with this detail, Joseph continued to deny anything related to SA. For Joseph's family and friends, the entire situation was a complete shock. They had always seen him as a decent, kind person and couldn't believe he was capable of something so horrific. His colleagues at the elementary school where he worked as a chemistry teacher were equally stunned. To them, Joseph was a talented and well-educated teacher who had never caused any trouble. As for the residents of their town, dozens of them began gathering outside Joseph's house in the days following his arrest. While most didn't act aggressively, police decided to block off the entire street as a precaution, fearing someone might try to harm his mother or grandmother. Some residents were so outraged by what had happened that they even started flipping through phone books looking for people with the last name McGowan and calling them to unleash their anger. None of these individuals had any connection to Joseph, yet incidents like this became common. Several families even filed complaints saying these calls were making their lives unbearable. Soon, the community was enraged even more because the judge decided to set Joseph's bail at $50,000 after his arrest. While that was a huge amount of money for the time, people were furious. Hundreds of them flooded the court with angry letters demanding the bail be revoked, insisting that Joseph should remain behind bars. The thought of him potentially walking free and living just a few houses away from his victim's family was unthinkable. But not everyone opposed the idea of Joseph being released on bail. Some residents were actually eager for him to get out so they could take justice into their own hands. Under immense pressure, the court eventually changed its decision and revoked Joseph's bail, even though his family had already managed to gather the necessary amount. In the end, he was kept in jail to await trial and placed in solitary confinement for his own safety, as other inmates were eager to harm him. The trial began several months after Joseph's arrest, and he pleaded guilty to the murder. However, he continued to deny the fact of SA and insisted that the crime was a spontaneous act. According to him, he didn't understand what had come over him, but the prosecution wasn't buying it. Before the trial, several psychiatrists evaluated Joseph, and they all concluded that he had harbored dark, monstrous desires for many years. He had managed to hide these urges, presenting himself as a normal and well-adjusted person. But the moment he had the chance to act on his fantasies, he didn't hesitate a second. There was also speculation suggesting that Joseph had planned something like this in advance. The fact that Joan's body was hidden deep in the woods behind a large rock raised serious doubts that he had chosen the spot on a whim. Investigators strongly believed he had known about the location long before the crime and kept it in his mind as a convenient place to dispose of a body. At the end of the trial, Joseph was sentenced to life in prison. But there was a catch. The laws at the time allowed for parole even for someone like him, which meant the case was far from over. Nearly 20 years later, Joseph became eligible to apply for parole, causing outrage among Joan's family. Her parents said they hadn't even known this was an option. To make matters worse, their attorney warned them that if they didn't take action to oppose his release, there was a strong chance Joseph would walk free. The problem was that over the years, Joseph had undergone multiple evaluations with psychiatrists, all of whom concluded that he was no longer a threat to society and could be released. Adding to his case was his spotless behavior throughout his time in prison. As a result, Joan's mother was forced to do everything in her power to convince the judge and others in the parole system that Joseph did not deserve to be released. At the same time, she decided to push for changes in the law to ensure that parole would never be an option for criminals like Joseph. And after many years of relentless effort, she succeeded. A new law was passed in New Jersey that made anyone convicted of murdering a person under 14 for the purposes of SA ineligible for parole under any circumstances. Just a year later, a federal version of this law passed, mostly thanks to Joan's mother's tireless advocacy. As for Joseph, he didn't fall under the jurisdiction of the new laws. However, Joan's mother still managed to convince the court to deny his parole. But in 1999, another chance for his release came up, and this time unexpected happened. Before the decision was made, Joseph underwent another evaluation with a psychiatrist, whose job was to assess his mental state. During these conversations, Joseph suddenly changed the story he had been sticking to for over 20 years. Initially, he had claimed that he attacked Joan out of frustration when he couldn't find the right amount of change. That story had never been particularly convincing, but now Joseph admitted that wasn't how it happened at all. According to Joseph, he had been going through personal struggles during that period of time. He was unsatisfied with his life, unhappy with his job, and generally miserable, which left his mind in a pretty dark state. When Joan came to his door with cookies, he claimed he just decided to take out his anger on her, leading him to commit the crime. Despite this new explanation, the court once again denied his parole. Over the following years, Joseph continued to petition for early release, but each time the outcome was the same. His requests were rejected. During one of his attempts to secure parole, Joseph gave an interview to John Douglas, a former FBI agent and author whose work inspired characters in The Silence of the Lambs and the series like Hannibal and Mindhunter. Douglas, known for interviewing infamous serial killers like Charles Manson, agreed to assess whether Joseph was fit to re-enter society. After their conversation, Douglas concluded that Joseph posed a significant danger to anyone around him, describing his uncontrollable urge to kill as deeply concerning. Using his unique approach, Douglas managed to earn Joseph's trust, uncovering something quite troubling in the process. At some point, Joseph boasted about having over $600,000. He explained that after his mother and grandmother passed away, he received sizable payouts and sold their house. But here's the kicker. Joseph revealed he had moved all the money to a bank in neighboring New York State to ensure that Joan's mother couldn't touch a single penny through civil lawsuits, leaving him with plenty of money to pay for legal representation. Douglas was so struck by this interview, he later wrote an entire book about it. Joseph's last attempt to secure parole was in 2008, with his next hearing scheduled for 2025. Joan's mother was preparing to oppose his release once again, but she didn't have to. Joseph passed away in 2021 at the age of 74. In the end, he spent most of his life behind bars and remained there until his death. As for Joan's mother, she continues her fight against criminals like the one that took her daughter. A few years ago, she successfully pushed to raise the age limit in her original law from 14 to 18 in New Jersey. She also helped pass another law in the state that completely removed the statute of limitations for murder cases. In addition to that, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping children, which has achieved remarkable results over the years. Joan's mother plans to keep building on this work, both to honor her daughter's memory and to protect thousands of other children. Case of Lamu. Unhealthy relationships with a cruel person and a narcissist never lead to anything good. It is crucial to realize this in time and break off such connections before a tragedy occurs. Emotional abuse is typically just the beginning and a prelude to physical violence, which the abuser will use to control and dominate their partner, suppress them, and create an atmosphere of constant oppression and fear. Our story today revolves around a popular Chinese blogger, Lamu, whose tragic end a few years ago shocked all of China. Lamu, a simple girl from a poor family, captivated a large audience with her kindness, sincerity, and boundless love for nature, and met a horrific end at the hands of her once-loved partner. The most chilling part of this incident is that the assault on her was broadcast live, and thousands of followers could only watch helplessly. Lamu was born in 1990 in Yaowa, Tibetan and Chang Autonomous Prefecture, Sichuan Province, China. She was the youngest of 3 children in a very poor family that barely made ends meet. She grew up with her older biological sister and stepbrother in a home shared with their parents and grandmother. Their family collected rare medicinal plants, which they sold in local pharmacies for a meager income. After completing only 3 grades, Lamu had to leave school to work with her family members and help support them. Along with the adults, she climbed high into the mountains where, at certain times and in special places, they could find the rarest herbs and flowers with healing properties. Lamu was well-versed in these plants and had a sincere love for nature, admiring its beauty and generosity and drawing strength and inspiration from the mountains. As social media popularity grew, she created her own account on a Chinese equivalent of TikTok. There, Lamu posted short videos showcasing her daily life, household activities, and the beauty of her native province. She called herself a mountain girl and had a deep affection for her work. Unlike many bloggers, she was not chasing fame. Fame found her. Her audience adored Lamu for her smile, purity, and almost childlike spontaneity. She never prepared content in advance, speaking her mind and feelings, and sometimes singing folk songs while showcasing the mountain landscapes. Lamu never used makeup or filters. Her hands and feet bore calluses, scratches, and scars, visibly evidencing the hard and long labor behind them. Gradually, Lamu's subscriber count grew, and not only locals but also tourists visiting the area began to recognize her. They referred to the blogger as that sweet mountain girl, offered warm words, expressed gratitude for her work, and asked for photos. Lamu was not proud of her fame, but she was delighted that her activities resonated with the audience and brought joy to others. In her youth, Lamu constantly went to the mountains with her parents and older sister. But as her sister grew up, got married, and moved to another province, and her parents, due to age, could no longer climb high or for long, Lamu took on all the work herself. She detailed to her followers the flora of the local area, explaining which specific flowers and herbs had what properties, how to collect them, and how to use them as food without accidentally harming the body. During certain seasons, Lamu could spend several weeks alone in the mountains gathering medicinal plants. She showed how she set up camps for the night, cooked her meals over a campfire, shared local legends and beliefs, and returned with a large and heavy backpack. Seemed to weigh more than she did. But this strong, brave, and hard-working beauty never elicited pity, because she glowed with happiness when engaging in her beloved activities in the mountains. Despite returning tired, worn out, and with bloody calluses, and despite never complaining about her tough fate and hard daily labor, Lamu long avoided one topic. She did not discuss her personal life, because she suffered for many years at the hands of her abusive husband, Tongli, enduring beatings and humiliations. But she tried not to show that she was deeply unhappy. Tongli was also a native of Sichuan province, born in 1990 into a simple and quite modest family. His parents adored their youngest son, indulging him from an early age, always striving to spoil and please him. At the age of 12, he quit school and started working as a courier, delivering groceries to local stores. He earned little but kept all the money to himself, not helping his family at all. Even then, the teenager began to show signs of greed, avarice, and narcissism. He believed the world revolved around him, that others owed him, but he owed nothing to anyone, desperate to become wealthy. He was willing to do anything, even break the law, and that's precisely what happened. At 15, Tong left home, fell in with the wrong crowd, and began dealing in banned substances and petty theft. He also dabbled in gambling and took pride in getting away with it. He aimed to earn respect in the criminal underworld, become rich, and escape the poverty he grew up in. Sometime later, Lee's parents opened their own small spice and tea shop, investing all their efforts and resources into it. The business quickly took off, generating a decent income, and the family soon became well off by local standards. At that point, Tong decided to return home and offered to help expand and promote the family business. In reality, he just wanted to live off his relatives, who worked hard daily. Tong considered himself successful and wealthy, spending money on personal luxuries, boasting to friends about his expensive items, and behaving selfishly, even claiming the store's success as his own. Meanwhile, he kept in touch with local criminals, maintaining a separate under-the-table business with them. First love, Tong and Lamu met when they were just 17. The young man was so enchanted by her beauty, kindness, and sincerity that he was head over heels in love. He courted her earnestly, giving gifts, and it seemed he was ready to change for her, become more mature and serious, and cut ties with the criminal world. The young and naive Lamu quickly fell for his charms, believing she had met her Prince Charming with whom she would be happy. No one had ever courted her so diligently before, and no one had tried so hard to win her over. Soon, the young couple developed a romantic relationship that lasted almost 2 years before they decided to make it official. As soon as Tong turned 19, he proposed to his beloved, who eagerly accepted. However, their parents were not thrilled about their decision to marry. They tried to dissuade the young couple, believing they were too young to start a family. But the young lovers wouldn't listen to anyone. In 2009, they got married, and the newlywed wife moved into her mother-in-law's house, Lamu's personal hell. Initially, married life seemed quite blissful. Tong tried to be a good husband, left behind his bad influences and gambling, focusing on his young wife and the family business. Lamu took on almost all the household duties, and also helped her beloved's parents in their shop. It wasn't long before her husband started disappearing with his old friends again. He returned to his unlawful activities, frequently consumed alcohol, and his behavior towards his wife drastically changed. Tong was no longer the gentle, kind, and caring man Lamu had fallen in love with a few years earlier. He became crude, self-centered, and aggressive. He took a portion of the store's earnings from a business where all the family members worked except for him, claiming it as his share, and spent all the money on his own needs, entertainments, and pleasures. The couple started arguing frequently. Lamu tried to reason with her husband, urging him to get his act together, work honestly, quit drinking, and stop associating with people from the criminal world. But Tong wouldn't listen to either his wife or his mother, believing no one had the right to tell him what to do. According to his parents' recollections, Conflicts in their home became a daily occurrence. The situation didn't change even when Lamu became pregnant. Her husband continued to vanish with his friends, and when he returned home, he was rough and aggressive. He was annoyed that his wife was now more focused on herself and their future child. He himself, like a child, demanded attention, and during one disagreement, he raised his hand to her for the first time. Lamu was shocked by her husband's action and declared she would return to her parents' home as she refused to tolerate such treatment. At that moment, her mother-in-law, who had unintentionally witnessed the incident, intervened. She approached her son and slapped him twice, telling him he had no right to treat the mother of his future child that way. Afterwards, the woman convinced her daughter-in-law to stay, promising that it would not happen again. Lamu believed her and decided to give her husband another chance, a decision she would bitterly regret as it was just the beginning of a real nightmare. From then on, Tong regularly became physically abusive, only to apologize afterward, crying and begging her not to leave him. Each time, Lamu wanted to believe he had come to his senses and would genuinely change, but the cycle repeated over and over. When she finally decided to leave her husband, he threatened to take their son away and do something terrible to her and her parents. Frightened, the young mother stayed, fearing he would carry out his threats. From then on, their child became his main tool for manipulation and blackmail. Lamu told none of her relatives about the nightmare unfolding in her husband's home. Even her older sister, with whom she had been very close since childhood, suspected nothing. In 2012, after a long and severe illness, Lamu's mother passed away, which was a huge shock for her. Her elderly father and grandmother were left virtually helpless, and she found herself literally living between two homes, managing to maintain order, cook, and help with the household chores everywhere. Meanwhile, Lamu continued to regularly climb the mountains for herbs to financially support both families. Only in the mountains, amidst the hard work, paradoxically, could she rest, be alone with her thoughts, and breathe freely without fear of her disgruntled husband coming home, causing a scene and hitting her again. In 2017, the woman gave birth to a second son. Relations with her husband remained strained, and her mother-in-law had long stopped trying to intervene on her daughter-in-law's behalf, though she took on all the care of the grandchildren when Lamu went to work in the mountains. Around the same time, Lamu created her account on Douyin, Chinese TikTok, where she started posting short videos showcasing the local beauty, discussing various flowers and herbs, their medicinal properties, and how to use them. Engaging with her audience became the outlet Lamu desperately needed to keep from going insane. Sometimes she quietly sang songs for her followers, and sometimes danced against the backdrop of mountain ridges. She always appeared happy, smiling genuinely, and never once complained to her audience about her difficult fate or mentioned the domestic violence she regularly endured. In 2019, Lamu's beloved grandmother passed away, and the blogger posted a video for the first time where she was crying, expressing her deep pain over losing a family member. Her numerous followers sincerely supported her, unlike her husband, who instead of showing sympathy became furious and struck her face, because she was sobbing. In January 2020, after enduring another severe incident of violence, Lamu finally decided to leave her tyrannical husband. She took her sons, moved back to her parents' home, and filed for divorce. Around the same time, Lamu recorded a new video stating that for the first time in a long while, she felt calm and confident. In the video, it was evident she tried to cover up a large bruise under her eye with concealer. However, she never disclosed to anyone the domestic abuse she had suffered for years. Regrettably, during the divorce proceedings, the court divided custody of the sons, leaving the younger child with the mother and the older with the father. This decision was a devastating blow for Lamu, and her now ex-husband unexpectedly changed tactics by romantically pursuing her again, proposing they start over and not break up the family. He swore he had realized his mistakes, wanted them and the boys to live together again, and promised to acknowledge all his past errors and never repeat them. For a couple of months, Tong put on the act of a repentant man. He gave flowers, created real celebrations for the family, tried to help his ex-wife around the house, and even joined her on mountain trips, which he had never done before. Lamu's heart softened, and she believed that he had genuinely changed. By the end of March, the couple remarried. As you might guess, the fairy tale ended as soon as Lamu returned to her husband's house. Tong reverted to being cruel, mean, and selfish, and within 2 weeks of remarrying, he brutally attacked his wife, nearly beating her to death. When Lamu interacted with her followers, he snatched the phone from her hands and hurled it against the wall, shattering it. Then he began to beat her with his fists and feet, giving her no chance to escape. Battered and barefoot, Lamu fled the house and immediately went to the police, seeking protection. But they only took her statement and advised her to try to resolve the family conflict on her own. After that, Lamu decided to hide from her husband in another village to avoid endangering her relatives. Enraged, her husband was ready to end the life of his runaway wife, but did not know where to find her. He assumed she might have gone to her sister's house. He visited the sister's home and began yelling, demanding she tell him where Lamu was. The woman knew nothing about it and asked him to leave. Then Tong repeatedly struck her in the face with all his might. At that moment, her husband was at work, so there was no one to protect the unfortunate woman. She suffered a fractured cheekbone and eye socket, and her nose was broken. After the second victim also filed a police report, was finally held accountable administratively, but he was not arrested. Nevertheless, Tong laid low while the second divorce proceedings were underway, not attempting to contact his wife. Unfortunately, this time around, the court, in dissolving the marriage, left both sons with the father, as the Lee family was wealthy, and money proved to be the deciding factor. The heartbroken mother was crushed with grief. Her close ones urged her to leave the village for a while, fearing the ex-husband would seek revenge and possibly do something dreadful. However, Lamu refused, wanting to be near her boys. 3 weeks after the second divorce, Lamu went to the mountains, where she recorded a video of herself singing and dancing. Apparently, this was her way of trying to relieve stress, but her ex-husband interpreted it as her celebrating their separation, which blinded him with rage. On the evening of September 14, 2020, around 8, Lamu started a live stream to chat with her followers. She was dressed in a traditional Tibetan outfit, softly singing folk songs. She put a finger to her lips, whispering that they needed to be quiet, because her father and visiting stepbrother were already asleep while she prepared breakfast treats for them. At that moment, a terrible noise erupted off camera, as if someone had kicked the door in. The blogger turned pale, frozen in fear, her eyes wide with horror. She stared at the person entering, then suddenly jumped up, clearly trying to escape. The tripod with her smartphone fell camera down, but the broadcast continued. Viewers could not see what was happening in the room, but could hear everything. Heavy footsteps were heard, followed by the sound of a liquid splashing on the floor and walls. Lamu started screaming for help. Then her father's voice pleaded with the intruder to calm down and put down the knife. Lamu warned her family that the room was doused in gasoline and begged them to save themselves. A sinister silence fell for a few seconds. Then the click of a lighter followed by a piercing scream was heard. The broadcast cut off as the crackle of flames spreading through the room intensified. Followers were in disbelief, unwilling to accept that they had witnessed a tragedy, with some even speculating it was a cruel prank. Unfortunately, the worst had occurred. Tong decided to brutally exact revenge on his ex-wife for daring to leave him. He rode a motorcycle to Lamu's house, bringing along a canister of gasoline and a large knife. Through the windows, he saw his ex-wife in the kitchen on the ground floor and kicked the door leading to the room. Tong caught Lamu off guard. She barely understood what was happening before she tried to flee, but he prevented her from escaping. Tong doused Lamu with fuel and wounded her with the knife before setting the house on fire. At that moment, her father and brother ran outside, shouting for neighbors to help, but they did not understand what was happening or the seriousness of the situation. As the flames erupted, her relatives rushed back into the house, but the old wooden beams, burning like torches, collapsed, blocking the entrance. It took firefighters about 2 hours to extinguish the fire. When they entered, they found Lamu in the room, her skin charred black and in places literally melted and stuck to the floor. Incredibly, Lamu was still breathing with a faint pulse detectable. She was immediately rushed to the hospital, where doctors were horrified by her condition. Over 90% of her body surface was burned and her lungs had nearly cooked from the heated air and smoke. She desperately continued to fight for her life. She was in a deep coma and her condition was deemed critical. Nevertheless, the city's burn center was prepared to help, but the treatment cost was a staggering £1,000,000, as some her family could not afford after losing everything in the fire. Then, Lamu's father decided to seek help from her followers. He wrote a letter explaining that her ex-husband had attacked her, attempting to end her life, but she had survived, and doctors held out a slim hope. However, the family simply didn't have the funds for her medical treatment. The letter was posted on her social account, along with a plea from her sister to all compassionate people to help Lamu, providing an account number for donations. The necessary funds for treatment were raised within an hour of the post, and people continued to send money. Lamu was transferred to the burn center, where she received the needed care. Her condition was stabilized, and at one point it even seemed she might recover. However, tragically, after 2 weeks of fighting for her life, her heart could not endure any longer, and she passed away without regaining consciousness. She was only 30 years old. At the trial, Tong's mother desperately defended her son, who had inflicted such cruelty, claiming that he did it out of intense love for his ex-wife and stress from their divorce. Nevertheless, the verdict was severe and just. The court found Lee guilty of deliberate, cruel deprivation of life and sentenced him to death, additionally mandating his family to compensate Lamu's relatives for the property loss due to the house fire. Tom attempted to appeal the verdict several times through appellate motions, but the decision remained unchanged. In July 2022, the sentence was carried out. Tong Lee was executed that same year, 2 years after the tragic event that ended a young woman's life. Her relatives rebuilt the house on the site of the burned one and were able to move back in. On the ground floor, her sister set up a small memorial altar with photographs of Lamu. The court left the orphaned boys in the custody of their paternal grandparents. The Lee family remained one of the wealthiest in the village, and the judges believed they could provide the children with better living conditions. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.